Hi, I'm Caitlin Lewis, the founder and CEO of Supplier Day. I was really excited to sit down with Mark Perera, one of the members of our executive board, to chat to him about the real impact of strong supplier engagement and how it can lead to not only creating operational efficiencies, but also building strategic advantage. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Excited to have this chat.
I am very excited to pick your brains. So we're going to leap right into it. And I really wanted, just as an introductory question, to ask you to explain how companies are defining and approaching supplier engagement, and why is this a key focus for operational strategy?
Yeah, I guess looking at your supplier ecosystem, whether we talk about supplier engagement or more traditional supplier relationship management, I guess as companies looked at it the last 20 years, it's all really about aligning your strategy with your suppliers. And ultimately, when you've got 80% of your spend probably going outside of your business rather with your employees, the need to align strategies with your big suppliers, but also the smaller ones, whether you're looking to drive innovation from your suppliers. So how do we get new products out there or transform what we're doing in the future, or driving productivity? Productivity is a big word, but that could be efficiencies, but also savings, but also the sustainability agenda. So the importance is quite clear. How you achieve it, how you sustain that as you take new agendas to them through the good times and the bad times is all about putting the right resources and processes in place, and also sparking that energy from the suppliers as well. They're dealing with large companies, and large companies aren't always the easiest to work with. It's sometimes hard to get access to those senior executives and understand where the direction of travel is for them, but also how does it have an effect on the suppliers as well. So supplier engagement, quite broad, but if you're looking at your EBITDA today and your EBITDA tomorrow, you really need to have your supplier ecosystem really aligned with your business as you look at these critical business objectives you're trying to achieve.
Thank you very much. It seems to me that a lot of the time, big companies sometimes really only want to engage with their suppliers when they need to drive cost savings. That's when they suddenly want to invest in building some kind of relationship with them, but it's all for quite cynical reasons. So I really like the picture that you're painting about how it's a lot bigger than that. It can be for innovation, it can be for collaboration, but ultimately it is all around this purpose of improving productivity.
Well, if you did that with your own internal resources, so we're only going to turn on HR and leadership when the business is going bad, you're probably not going to drive the best out of your business. Same with your suppliers. If you're just turning it on when it's in the down times and you're doing some accelerated cost out, then the cynical suppliers are going to see you for what you are. If you really want to be a customer of choice, so have empathy from your suppliers when you want to share some pain with them if the markets are against you, then it's what you're doing in the good times and in the bad times that's going to grow those relationships, which means you're a customer choice, whether you're looking at continuity of supply, access to innovation, driving the new net zero journey. They'll be aligned with you to take the journey. But yeah, if you're just turning it on, the suppliers will be cynical because you're basically using it as a tool for beating them up with a stick rather than a carrot. And I think as we look at the transformational times there are, when we're dealing with probably more speed and agility is a key thing that you want as you're transforming to new consumer markets or your customers' marketplace, but also the net zero and the sustainability side. There's lots of things that we need to solve with our supply chain, which we haven't had to do in the past, and also have that agility and flexibility to do that with speed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that just struck me now, and it is input that we get from our clients quite often, is that all too often a relationship is based on two people within an organization. So there's one person within the supplier's organization, and there's one person in your organization that have built up a fantastic collaborative relationship. There's lots of trust, there's lots of transparency, and of course, lots of value is born out of that relationship. But it seems to me that having a strong supplier engagement program then helps to kind of alleviate the risk around just essentially relying on two people getting along really well in order to get real value from a relationship.
Yeah, I think it's if we all think it's just a bow tie shape where there's two individuals connecting the two organizations, we're probably mistaken by that. It's kind of more of a diamond shape in terms of how the relationship's there. And we need to facilitate those ones from the strategic conversations from the C-level with maybe the C-level of the suppliers, but also the operational teams coming together. So quite a lot of these supplier relationship programs start with all the strategy and aligning executives together, but ultimately they come down to the operational part fairly quickly, and then it comes to operational performance management, and all the lovely strategy and forward-thinking stuff can drop out. So, it's not a bow tie, it's definitely a diamond. But also, if we think about the amount of time that senior execs or the business look with their top customers, where they're driving the revenue from, they should be spending a reasonable amount of time with their top suppliers, where probably 80% of their spend is with 20% or less of their suppliers. That's a huge amount of money going out the door. And as we look to trim down our business, make it a little bit more agile, lean, we're looking for the R&D. We're looking for the best team from our suppliers. So by not investing them is really affecting both your short-term and your long-term strategies for your EBITDA and your growth strategy, which is definitely what your shareholders are going to be asking for as well. Plus, net zero, 80% of your emissions are probably outside of your business. So we can make all the pledges internally. We can, have those lovely reports that come out. But if you're not engaging with your suppliers, if they're not collaborating and working with you to actually reduce and remove the emissions, then you look at all the regulations, the fines that are coming in the future, you're also putting some risk. So I think there's a big risk star that should be going on the risks register around the net zero side if the business and procurement aren't actually aligned with the suppliers around the net zero and probably the more auditable part of what these joint programs are going to do to hit your 2030 targets or your 2040 targets as well, whilst also driving new products and driving profitability at the same time.
Yeah. How do you see strong supplier relationships contributing to overall business strategy? Can you share any examples of where supplier engagement directly led to improved business outcomes?
So if we look at FMCG and automotive industry, we'll see their ability to capture new innovation, but also commercialize it quickly. So companies who have deep supplier relationships or engagement, McKinsey have shown us take a 40% increase in speed of actually commercializing that innovation. So it's great to capture a great idea or some new technology from a supplier, and we can do all the champagne and some photos around that. But when you actually commercialize it and it gets out to your customers and consumers, that's when innovation comes through. Innovation, I think, is defined by McKinsey, is the creation of new revenue lines that are profitable. So if you're looking 3 years from now, how does that innovation actually come to new revenue, new profitable revenue lines? And that's where it comes through. So it's more of a long-term view of how you do that. So I definitely look at FMCG and automation in terms of the innovation side. I think we also can look at the productivity side, efficiencies. We have the cost of doing business. I think we're seeing in the pharma space now, how do we align our suppliers, which are fundamental to the operating model of a big pharma organization, of how we actually try and reduce some of the inefficiencies of those relationships that they have in terms of, really understanding the flow of work between the two organizations and making that more efficient as they look to streamline kind of their pipeline, but also their go-to-market around new products as well. Big pharma's had a huge change. They're buying molecules at a lot higher price now, and then they have limited time to actually commercialize them as well. But we're seeing in lots of different industries there as well. And on the sustainability side, I think the real leaders are engaging with their suppliers around the broader sustainability side. I think we're going to see a move to nature, but definitely on the climate side.
Yeah.
Getting ahead of it. I think those companies who can actually see how they're going to deliver against their commitments are going to be, at the forefront of their industries, while the others kind of catch up as they take a little bit longer in terms of actioning as well.
Yeah, and I know that you're a big metrics guy. How can companies actually track back the impact that suppliers had on delivering some kind of innovation? Because a lot of them will say there's so many variables at play. How do you know that there was that one thing that a supplier helped you to deliver, that helped you to innovate on a product that you were then able to commercialize effectively?
Similar metrics in your own R&D department. Again, relating back to pharma. You have all these drugs that you invest heavily in, and sometimes you take them a bit too far and then they drop into nothing. So There are some metrics that should be running around innovation and new products internally. Apply the same ones to the external ones, but I guess the great part of that is not your R&D, it's their R&D. So if you're aligning around a new product, you can facilitate the diffusion of that idea across your organization, finding that proof point of where you can start getting that product to market and scale it, then you can see the profitability. But also, you'll have a supplier or supplier ecosystem who can deliver that product, that service, that new material at mass. So I think you should be looking at innovation in the same way as you'll look at the internal innovation side, but also the cost of doing business. And if you're doing B2B business, you'll have account management costs. You'll know how much it costs to look after that customer. There's a cost of managing your supplier, and they have a cost of doing business with you. So if you can drive more efficiencies in the way that the two organizations work, then hopefully you can both reduce the cost of doing business, maybe trim some of the fat from the commercials you have with the supplier, but also have the agility of the organizations working together as well. But if we blanketly think there's no cost of doing business, which we know there is, because we have the account management costs, we can definitely drive efficiencies by actioning that as well.
I really love that point. I mean, essentially it is don't overcomplicate it. There are metrics out there already that you can pretty much adopt and adapt into the procurement side of things and how you're managing those relationships with suppliers. There seems to be a real shift at the moment for procurement to start looking outward a bit as opposed to always looking inward.
Take a look at your cost of HR.
Yeah.
You have X billion of HR of people spent.
Yeah.
So you have people dedicated to driving the best short-term and long-term benefits out of them, from the leaders to the HR people and then the cascade through. What's the investment you're making where it could be a fourfold in spend with your suppliers? Do you have the same correlation in spend? They're still trying to drive gross EBITDA from your suppliers and scale and continuity, but how much are you investing in your people against your supplier ecosystem or your extended enterprise? Mm-hmm. I think you'll find quite a small amount goes to supplier engagement.
Absolutely, and it's almost always the first thing to go when companies are under pressure to deliver savings and improve their EBITDA. How does fostering strong relationships with suppliers translate into productivity? What specific processes or collaborations have you seen that have yielded really significant results?
Well, I guess the big one is to look at Apple. I think their market cap and their profitability is rather good.
Yeah.
They design good products, not always the groundbreaking technology, but they build the right partners. They have design partners who help, actually design and build those products. And then they have an amazing supply chain. It's not surprising that Tim Cook's the former head of supply chain, is running the business, and it's so efficient and taking it through. So Apple's an easy one to look at that. And Foxconn and all these other suppliers have been building Apple in terms of all its growth and profitability over the years. So that's the slickest one, and I think it's in the top few companies in the world that's really built both technology and software and dominating that space as well.
Which is an interesting one to me, because Apple is also notorious for having very, very tight control over their supply chain, over their manufacturing process. And actually in the past, there's been quite a lot of reports about how they're not the easiest company to work with and that they really push their suppliers. So it's interesting then to talk about, well, how have they then still been able to have so much success, which has to come down to solid relationships at some point, while also pushing for incredibly high standards and essentially building high performance relationships.
Yeah, again, you can look at Foxconn.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, the margins may be minimal, but there's volume going through it.
Yeah.
So, if there's not the margins to work with them or the quality's not there, but when we pick up an Apple device, we're looking for that innovation, we're looking for that quality. So you have to expect that of the supply chain. All right. Now, what happens in the factories in China and so forth of all the suppliers there, they have to look at the living standards, working standards there. So that's a broader part. But you have to be open and honest with your suppliers around what your expectations are on cost and quality. But also they're building long-term relationships that they can invest in the R&D and the manufacturing plants because they know where Apple's going. They have confidence that Apple are going to buy more from them at volume, and also bring the next products to them as well. If it wasn't sustainable, those suppliers would not carry on working with Apple, as Apple doesn't really allow you to say who your customers are. They're quite close on that. It's not about a branding exercise for the supplier saying we're working with Apple. It's because there's a good commercial relationship that they can build on over time.
And they also, I take your point that, you can't really build on the brand association, but there's probably even indirect benefit internally knowing we're working with Apple. There's huge aspiration behind that again speaks to that customer of choice element.
Yeah, and companies need to look at how they use that, some of the soft things they can do with suppliers to reward them. A press release working with a company that is bringing something new to you. You might have a year where it's exclusive to your organization, but it doesn't cost you anything to do the press release that you're working with a supplier who's innovative. But it'd been great for them to actually build up 10 other customers, which will give them a better foundation as suppliers. They bring more revenue and get kind of more volume around some of the things they're delivering for you. So we have to look beyond, this is really complicated to get the press release out or recognize them through an award. Let's look at the soft things that we can do with them. Also, give them exposure to senior execs. They want to understand where your business goes. Having a meeting with a senior exec is a huge part for them to bring their execs in and engage, rather than just being a transactional part all the time.
Earlier when we were talking, around how some organizations kind of only engage with their suppliers when they need to drive some kind of cost out, and the cynical suppliers will see that for what it is. I was then also thinking while you were talking, well, how much longer will it be before suppliers get a little bit more wiser about their customers who are driving the whole rah, 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 we want to innovate with you, we love you, we want to be your customer of choice, you guys are so fantastic. And they start seeing that for essentially what it is, which is to drive greater productivity, to get higher value from suppliers. But at the same time, does that really matter as long as the company means what they're saying? Which again, if we go back to the Apple example, is probably quite a good one.
If you just do it for the fireworks and a ceremony, then great, fantastic. You've convinced them for a few hours and they'll sit there and clap and they'll like the messaging. But if it doesn't turn into reality of a change of behavior, then it is what it is. We're just back to normal after, that kind of commitment and so forth. So it's no different than your kids when they tell you they're not going to do that again, and then the next day they do it again. Is there. So you have to follow through on your commitment. If you're talking about innovation with them and so forth, and be open on getting access to your executives, you need to do that. If you're talking about sharing in some tough times ahead, but also sharing in the good times, then how do you follow that through? How do you give them access to the business? Where the pipeline is, how they can do it, and then they start believing it. But it's people believing in people, and it's not just going to be an account manager who's going back to their team. It's also more broadly the senior execs from the suppliers as well.
To your point earlier that innovation isn't just about what it is that you can commercialize for your end customer. It can also be around driving operational efficiencies. In what ways do supplier partnerships enhance operational excellence? Why is that important, and how does it really lead to competitive advantage?
Well, I think agility and speed is one of the big things at the moment. I think it's common across most industries. Everything's just moving a lot more quickly. Mm-hmm. So continuity of supply as well. So how do we keep the business going, and quality side of the business today? And that will drive cost efficiency, but also agility and speed is the key thing, because the consumer and the customer needs are changing fundamentally. So how do we do that in our relations? Now, if we don't have a process, we don't have beyond two individuals from a commercial side working out, then how agile and speedy can we make the things that we're doing together? Now, obviously from a manufacturing side, there's going to be all the flow through there, but we also need the relationships to be agile and aligned. And if you're not aligned on strategy, then when new things come about, when you want to change, then it takes longer for the supplier to think about, all right, we need to scale the manufacturing of this already, or come straight to you and say, all right, we need a X amount of order. There's more empathy from the supplier if you actually have that strategic alignment with the suppliers as you go through, but also more broadly with not just your top suppliers, the ecosystem as a whole. they want to go from maybe having a small amount of spend with you with the opportunity to innovate and put some of their R&D so they can be the large supplier of the future. And what we're seeing in a lot of supply chains is a shift from some of the old suppliers to the new. So we're going to see in a lot of industries that switch, and how AI comes into the whole world of it is going to be an interesting side. I don't think it's going to fundamentally hit every industry in kind of the next couple of years, but there's going to be a shift in the way that we do work, and the way that businesses engage as well.
Absolutely. I've been doing a couple of interviews with a few CPOs across multiple different industries, and whenever you ask a question about what emerging trends are there, they all talk about AI being the big one at the tip of everybody's tongue right now. But there's also starting to be a differentiation between analytical AI and then generative AI, and that's really where it's at.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm very excited by the AI space, and I'm an old man now. So 1993, I went to university and the internet was bubbling up, and that kind of took my eye and focus. It's interesting. Roland Berger just did a piece of research, came out of looking at the opportunities around generative AI against the procurement process. Mm-hmm. And there's huge opportunities around some of the transactional side. Interesting around the pillar of supplier relationship management, like 0% of real impact around Gen AI, because it's relationships and building it. Now there's parts of the SRM or supplier engagement process where generative AI would definitely facilitate it, but it's still going to have people, trust and collaboration coming through on that. So as we automate some of the other parts through Gen AI or augment the roles that we have with Gen AI, it allows those clever people in procurement and the business to invest more time with the suppliers, where you're going to drive, sustainable business growth, but competitive advantage by tapping into your suppliers, their R&D, their speed, their innovation, their new product lines that are going to help you hit your net zero. We need to work out that operating model. And I think that's what's coming through from the CPOs. I'm excited to some of the conversations I had in the next couple of months around CEOs who've led large multinational companies, how they're talking about the real need for procurement to talk about how they're investing in the supplier ecosystem. But the AI and the technology will support that as well.
Yeah, and this is where my ignorance around AI and how companies are applying it really shows. But what I would imagine, and again, if we link it back to those supplier relationships, capability building and alignment, is it's great if you as a company are investing in generative AI, using it to enhance your operations, create greater efficiency, innovate, whatever it is. But the moment that you also require your suppliers to engage with you around it, if they don't have the same capabilities in their organizations and they're maybe behind the curve on it, you're going to struggle, right? So there also needs to be a strong alignment in terms of, well, we're investing in this, you're going to need to do the same. And also working out who are the companies that are ahead of the curve and can potentially coach and help to drive that uptake.
Yeah, I think, it depends on the category of spend and the industries that you work in. If we look at the sales organization, we know that, AI is coming in across it. You'll see the massive emails that you're getting that are very tailored to you. Still of no interest, and we'll go to the spam folder. But it's lots more clever than the emails in the past. I'm not sure we're seeing that from the supplier engagement side. The other thing is most of the contracts that, within one of my companies that we're working on, they used to be a tech contract. Now they're an AI contract. So they also want to make sure that in that relationship and the information they're sharing, it's not going into an AI model. So there's been a shift just over the last 6 months in those contracts coming through. So yes, AI is going to be great in terms of driving efficiencies, augmenting roles, making people more efficient. But when we're dealing with customers and we're signing up to all the security stuff, we also need to make sure that the knowledge between the companies is not going into some sort of algorithm or parts that can be done. It's very easy to turn this stuff on, but there's risk involved as well.
I completely get it when we talk about the importance to drive that alignment, with suppliers in order to drive stronger efficiencies, especially around operations. Suppliers need to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve for the long term. They need to be involved early on. How can you measure the impact that strong supplier engagement can have in terms of efficiency or cost saving? It just seems like such a soft, indirect driver that is very difficult to measure.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I would look to get a baseline of what your cost cost in doing business would be, and if you haven't got a measurement of that around that, so let's say your top 500 suppliers make up 80% of your spend, you should be able to get a baseline calculation that there should be someone in your organization who crunch the numbers of how much we're spending on it, because each one of your suppliers has definitely got an account management percentages against yours, so it shouldn't be too hard to flip it the other way around. Then you've got risk. So everyone's looking at lovely technology with a map, which is going to float up all the risk that comes through, and then they have to do something with the risk there. But again, mitigating risk, is it a piece of technology, or is it making sure that suppliers are actually going to come early when they have a risk coming, because they actually trust the relationship as well? So we have the CFOs talking about risk being a big part of your supplier relationship. But if you've got 80% of your spend with your top 500 suppliers, you really want to make sure that the relationship is trustworthy, that they're going to come to you with the risk early as well. And then it's the innovation, the R&D. Again, back to my point on scope 3, there's risk associated with that. If your suppliers aren't really taking the journey with you, it's coming through. Also, on the innovation side, are you getting the R&D from them as well? But you have to start small. So I'd look at the cost of doing business. I don't think that's a complicated thing for companies to look at. What is the cost of doing business, and have a correlation to HR spend and people spend. How do we manage 20 billion of spend with people versus the 60 million of spend that's going out externally? They're both driving EBITDA and growth, and we're going to be shifting more from the internal to the external as we try and get more agility and be more lean. So we're going to have to increase our investment and supplier engagement in order to do that. But if you don't have a baseline of the cost of doing business with your suppliers, then it's very hard to take the model and the risk of it. But we definitely know that if we don't look after our employees, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
But again, then we look at diversity, we look at sustainability. We know that our suppliers, we're committed, that they are involved in us delivering it, and we have to take responsibility. The regulations around this are coming through from the EU, from the US, more globally. So we have to treat them as an extension of our organization. And that comes with the financial side as well. Risk, EBITDA, and growth.
Yeah. Can you connect the dots for us? So how does improved productivity or operational excellence driven by strong supplier engagement lead to a higher EBITDA? What factors are at play?
Starts with understanding what your business is trying to achieve. And that's why engaging with senior execs on what the medium to long-term strategy is important. Otherwise, it's very hard to then articulate that with your suppliers. And then what are you trying to drive in terms of operational efficiency? Is it just in-year cost savings? Well, I guess you don't need your CEO and your CFO to tell the suppliers about that. It's just, we're going to try and hit you for 10% reduction. It's a big stick, and that's all you're going to go after. But if you're actually looking at operational excellence over a period of time and efficiencies, then that's a longer-term goal. And that's changing the operating model. Now, we have to look at the operating model of procurement. Quite often it's driven to the in-year savings that they're targeted for. And there's multiple companies, Hackett, AT Kearney, and other good consultancies, which will look at savings per FTE as a key outcome of a procurement organization. They are coming up with other ones, and I'm sure they're very progressive on this, but it goes beyond the year. So that's where we have to engage with the senior executives to actually do that, so you can create the operating model of the future. We're talking about the operating model that's going to go into 2030. So we know everything is shifting. You mentioned about Gen AI. We know that our remit around sustainability is now coming in, as well as looking at our cost and risk and everything else. So what's the operating model of procurement?
Yeah.
Okay, then how does that go into the organization? Because the suppliers aren't just dealing with procurement, they're dealing with the buyers. They're the people who are actually taking their resources. So we have to understand the medium to long-term strategy. We need to be creating the operating model of 2030. And if we think what got us here will get us there, I think the next 5 years is going to be a fundamental shift in the way the operating model comes through. That will be driven by Gen AI around some of the automated processes that are coming through, but how we're actually going to be competitive in the future. We can carry on doing or not doing what we're doing around suppliers in the past, but I think the companies that win within the industries are going to have the most agile, most aligned supplier ecosystem in there, who are going to help deliver and transform the business as well.
that requires such a fundamental shift in the way most businesses approach procurement today. Procurement just seems to be required by the rest of the business to react on the short term. It'll be, oh, we're in trouble now. We quickly need to flip to EBITDA, savings. Then when, okay, cool, we're out of the woods now, we can chill out a little bit and let's focus on other nicer pieces. So it just seems to me, I'm fully on board with it, but it requires the whole business to kind of invest in the longer term within procurement, as opposed to requiring it to be very reactive and kind of being on this weird sort of 3 to 5 year cycle.
Well, I guess it's that correlation with the C-level. No, I think 3 years of a CPO or 4 years of CPO is a normal cycle. But should the SRM or the supplier engagement actually be led by the CPO, or should it be someone from the leadership team who's going to be there in the next session? And is it in the operating model? Yeah. If it's only the CPO who in that 3 year period is aligned around the supplier ecosystem, is it really part of the operating model?
Yeah.
Or is it a pet project of the CPO who can see the vision? And it probably means that the C-level aren't completely bought into the importance of suppliers. The other thing is doing a one-off supplier event is great, but you have to have this follow-up. There's communication that's need to be consistent on a regular basis. So I think it's also getting the comms in there, exposure to the senior leadership team, which is all fundamentally what should be in a traditional SRM program. But if no one's looking at what happens day to day in the SRM part and the importance, and at the first, challenges of cost reduction or efficiency, all that effort drops or the people goes away from it, then the same thing will happen next time that the suppliers aren't aligned and you're not there. So it is about the operating model. So what is your operating model for 2030? Does it make a difference if you're engaged with your suppliers where you're spending 80% of your spend? Or are you going to just try and churn your suppliers and hit them with the next cost and then the next day ask them to innovate new things or drive new sustainability goals? You're not really going to be the customer choice. So I think it does work with the C-level, but for procurement leaders who want to make that transformation, I think it's embedding it into the procurement leadership team, not just the CPO role, and how the KPIs of the category managers or the regional managers are actually driving that difference in terms of the time they're spending on it, but also what their business units are looking to deliver from the supplier engagement module as well, or approach. So if we don't measure it, you can't take it. Now, that could be, savings. It could be suppliers who are pledging to science-based targets, putting clear carbon reduction programs in the next 2-3 years where you can actually see a project behind it. Could be new innovations coming through in there as well. So what are the measurements you're trying to do across the organization? Again, if you can't measure it, if there's no outcome to the business, then it will just be seen as an expense. Again, is HR just an expense for 20% of your total company spend? No, because you're trying to drive the best out of them. You're trying to create the best environment for them to drive the top line growth and EBITDA as well. Yeah. So I think we do need to be able to measure it. How do we measure HR? I mean, that's the question.
Yes.
How do we manage different business units?
Yeah.
And then what's supporting that business unit? Well, there's a whole lot of suppliers behind there. So we should be able to find some KPIs, but it's probably not the same KPIs for all the different business units or categories.
Yeah.
So then, we should relate those to the business requirements.
Yeah.
And what are the business imperatives? We can't keep going to suppliers with, hey, it's net zero today. Oh, now it's efficiency. Now we're going to talk about diversity. There's a bit of a lag that's coming through to them. So what are the important things over the next 18, 36 months? And here is our goal for 2030. This is what we want as an organization. This is how we're working with, the top 200, 500 suppliers come along there, and how we bring the small suppliers in there to help us on that journey as well. So it's not a magic wand. I would look at the cost of doing business. I would look at the risk if you're not investing in those. So there's definitely an application, but also what's the business imperatives you're putting your programs around? What's important to your business in the next 3 years?
I love the use of looking at HR, because one of the similarities that I always love to draw is, I guess the awakening that talent acquisition had probably 10 to 15 years ago now, that they had to drive a strong employer brand to attract the best talent, based on the understanding that the best people for the job aren't looking for one. They're already somewhere getting paid a really good amount, a lot of career satisfaction, they're happy. So how is it that you can drive that strong brand within your organization that will ultimately attract them to join you? And I think that it is the exact same thing the customer of choice is trying to drive. But to your point, potentially procurement aren't quite approaching it with that same rigor or understanding that you do have in talent acquisition and retention right now. So to that point, how do you see the role of supplier engagement evolving? What trends or innovations do you think are going to become crucial for maintaining and enhancing productivity and financial performance that procurement is always going to have to answer for?
Linking it back to business strategy. So if it's not linked to business strategy, whether it's in a business unit or region or division, then it won't survive. So I keep saying about the net zero one because it's a clear one that's common. But you need to link it to something that's measurable and the business cares about. That allows you then to have a continual conversation with them rather than offer, hey, we're going to work differently with you. Back to the desk, and we just carry on delivering on there. So there needs to be something meaningful that the board care about. That could be growth within a new product line. It could be about driving efficiencies because we need to do that while we're shifting over new high EBITDA products and services somewhere else. So I would focus it around something that's really important to the business over the next 3 to 5 years as we look at 2030, which is scary that it's getting to that point. But then you're also aligned with them around what's happening in between. So this is our long-term strategy. This is what we need to work together on this year. That could be efficiencies and savings and productivity, but this is where we're going to. So we'll work on the journey together. But if you go try and do everything with them, it's a hard message to do and a hard thing to follow up on. And it has to be consistency. So, as you do with your employees, yes, we're going to do a launch of the strategy for this year, but quarterly we're going to be looking at that. We'll be engaging with our teams on an individual basis. So if we take the same as HR, all right, how are we looking at our categories of spend? Yes, we'll get all our important suppliers. Right now we're going to look at a category of suppliers and taught them how we want to bring new sustainable products in there and how you can drive your innovation. And then we'll follow up with them around those ideas coming through. And when the ideas coming through, we'll make sure they get enough time with the executives and the teams internally to actually see if we can take them through and invest and scale them. But if we don't do that, there's no operating model behind it. So it's, yes, the big bang of an event or some communications going out, but how do we follow that up in the different categories or the different regions where their strategies can come through, and that's where the value will be generated.
Yeah.
But with no business imperative, no consistency, be the same as having a nice communication with all your employees at the beginning of the year, and we'll see you next year and see if we're going to drive our revenue, EBITDA, and our productivity. Yeah. There seems to be quite a lot of interaction through the year. We should be looking at that same investment, that same cadence with our suppliers.
Absolutely. Mark, thank you so much.
That's all right. I'd love to chat, and excited to see how you continue to support companies on their supplier engagement programs as well.
Absolutely. We'll continue to push them.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.